प्रसार भारती अभिलेखागार की प्रस्तुति सदाबहार सुनहरे दौर का अनमोल खजाना।
Hello. In these last few weeks, we saw the meteoric rise of the French avant-garde, the delicate aesthetics of the Eastern European cinema, the raw power of the Latin American movement, and the unbelievable development of the Indian New Wave cinema. But have you ever stopped to think of some of those filmmakers who have made some very seminal, basic, fundamental contribution into the body and soul of their works? In this episode, we will talk about a highly introspective, personal kind of cinema made by a few filmmakers. To these film directors, it does not matter whether they come from this country or that country. For them, cinema was an extension of a universal development in art, an extension in the experiments which were conducted by classical artists in the field of painting, music, theatre. In this episode, we will look at these films which border on almost a philosophical, metaphysical level, and yet it keeps a definite human engagement at the core of it. And if we have to name one particular filmmaker in the field of modern cinema who could be called truly the founder of this personal, self-reflexive form, it can be none other than Robert Bresson. In this highly acclaimed film called O Hazard Balthazar, Robert Bresson probes the theological aspects of developments in philosophy, especially in the Christian world. Bresson's film questions the notion of what is absolute. Is it God? Is it faith? Is it some kind of metaphysical power? Can the believer perceive it in some kind of tangible form at all? Bresson feels that an answer is possible for all these nagging questions.
Mais lorsqu'il afflige la compassion selon sa grande miséricorde, car ce n'est pas volontiers qu'il humilie et qu'il afflige les enfants des hommes.
But it can be arrived at only through a process of self-sacrifice, a process of self-negation and suffering. When any living being, be it the donkey in this film or any determined person, decides to achieve that state of grace, that realization of freedom, then it is possible only through suffering. The highly underplayed acting in this film is a consequence of such philosophy.
Prêtez-le-nous.
Il a assez travaillé. Il est vieux et je n'ai plus que lui.
Rien qu'un jour.
Et puis c'est à ça.
Another radical filmmaker to work with the image of Christ and Christianity was Pier Paolo Pasolini. In his sensational film called Gospel According to St. Matthew, Pasolini demolishes all the usual romantic notions of the great Christian saints.
Ecco, i tuoi discepoli fanno quello che non è lecito fare il giorno di sabato.
Non avete letto quel che fece Davide quando egli e quelli che erano con lui ebbero fame? Come entrò nella casa di Dio e mangiò i panni della proposizione, che né a lui né a quelli che erano con lui era lecito mangiare, ma ai sacerdoti soltanto. O non avete letto nella legge come di sabato i sacerdoti nel tempio infrangono il sabato eppure non sono colpevoli?
You will be wondering as to what is it that drives filmmakers like Robert Bresson and Pasolini to make one abstract film after another, despite being criticized for being so indulgent and so boring. The only comparison that I can give you is to see similar roles being played by pure scientists and scholars in the field of highly theoretical studies. Have you wondered what is it that drives those pure scientists sitting in sterile laboratories, working away on subjects like subatomic physics or fundamental mathematics without any clue as to whether their studies will be of any use to anybody in the future? Well, for these filmmakers, making of a film was like an experimental laboratory. And watching Maya Deren's highly stylized Meshes of the Afternoon, you will realize the true meaning of such films. Maya Deren and Alexander Hamid worked their film far beyond the scope of a Buñuel surrealist experiment. In this film, a woman returns home after watching a mysterious black-veiled figure before her. She then observes the dislocation of several objects that used to be associated with her past. The film takes off from here to study some of the basic psychological positions. Does the fragmenting of one's present perception end up fragmenting one's memories of the past? Or are these fragments called illusions? By creating them, does the human being enjoy the state of flux, of confusion, of terror? In a world going crazy and heterogeneous, it is so easy to conventionalize, so convenient to divide the world into heroes and villains. The villains are crazy misfits and the heroes are the solution givers, the rectifiers. But is the world so simple as that? Obviously not. So the standard avant-garde torchbearers decide to subvert the system, make anti-establishment films, protest against it. But that would be just another form of counterpoint, another form of an anarchic rebellion. Is it truly the cinema that we are looking for? So these filmmakers decide to interrogate into the very process of thinking. What is it that makes the individual decide whether this is good or that is bad? Into this probe excelled a filmmaker called Alain Resnais.
Le lendemain, ou le sous-lendemain, ou le lendemain encore. C'était peut-être par hasard.
Resnais's constant obsession was how man perceives time, and Marienbad is all about that. How much of time is rooted in the past, rooted in memories, and how much of it is given to the future, filled with desires. Resnais sees that it is in this conflict between the past and the future that the present tense gets defined. The present tense becomes transparent. Resnais concludes that in this conflict, man often distorts his memories, changes the past to suit his convenience, and thus justify his power over the present tense.
Parce que vous avez peur. Ne reconnaissez-vous pas non plus cette photographie?
Si. Non. Je ne sais pas, je ne me rappelle plus.
Vous vous rappelez très bien qui l'a faite et où et quand?
Vous mentez, je n'en sais rien.
C'était l'année dernière. J'aurais dû insister pour que vous me laissiez.
To answer this comes Tarkovsky, a filmmaker from the erstwhile Soviet Union. Tarkovsky is the one that flew over the cuckoo's nest. The most puzzling thing about this highly complex film called Solaris is the fact that it was made in the erstwhile Soviet Union, where art was constantly defined by benchmarks of socialist realism and simple communicative abilities. And yet Tarkovsky's Solaris has nothing to do with simplistic communication. Tarkovsky takes an antithetical stand to Rene by defending his thesis that it is in the manipulation of the future, of the unborn present, of the level of desires that man and his system will finally assert power. Tarkovsky believes man's memory to be too short and therefore easily changeable, manipulable, but his desires are more complex, more vicious, and symbolically enough, the story is located in a spaceship where all notions of time and space are abandoned, where mankind stages a war with no holds barred to command superiority over Earth and its human population. Well, life can't be so complicated. So finally, the filmmaker who manages to make the perfect blend, an ideal compromise between the powerful construction systems and the human dramas closest to his heart, was a filmmaker from Sweden, and his name was Ingmar Bergman. In Wild Strawberries, Bergman happily combines the Christian enquiry of a Bresson, the surrealism of a Maya Deren, the rebelliousness of Pasolini, and the contemplative mood of Alain Resnais. Undoubtedly, the most consummate filmmaker to emerge in the late 50s, Ingmar Bergman swept all major awards with his highly philosophic overtones on the one hand, and even did well at the box office with his sensuousness. Wild Strawberries traces the journey of a professor, physically speaking, on his way to collect a great award at the university. But psychologically speaking, he was on a journey into the innermost recesses of his mind, his childhood, and the various objects that he loved held close to his heart.
Borde folk här nu också?
Nej, inte i sommar.
Jag går och tar mitt dopp om ni inte har något emot det. Vi har ju gott om tid.
Ja, visst gör du det.
But it was in the year before Wild Strawberries that Bergman achieved international recognition by winning the Best Film Prize at Cannes Film Festival with his amazing Seventh Seal. This film was an intricately structured discourse on life and death, personified by allegorical characters. The bare landscape symbolizing the state of mind into which the individual posits a series of complex thoughts, notions of evil and good, God and devil, right and wrong. Why does man choose to manipulate his mindscape in such a manner? Bergman treats these allegories with a very realist commitment and answers it with his conviction that wins him admirers all over the world.
Medan regnet sköljer över deras ansikten, tvättar deras kinder från tårarnas sand.
What is very evident watching these films is an apparent lack of spontaneity, a kind of light-heartedness. Some critics develop a kind of resentment when they see too much of control and precision going into these carefully organized works. But why not? Can these works be called difficult just because the director has put in so much time and effort organizing them? Has not this critical fate befallen even Indian filmmakers like Mani Kaul, Kumar Shahani, or even Adur Gopalakrishnan?
We don't need to feel small, before the awesome, big budget, colossal films that are being shown in the big festivals. Because most of the time the big festivals feature films, they are not necessarily artistic, but then they come with the kind of big commercial hype. So that is not a test of a of the quality of a film. There are good festivals, bad festivals. There are good audience, as you have good audiences, bad audiences, good critics, bad critics. So it depends on the taste of the festival organizers, management, the selections. The selections depend on that, and most of the time the selections don't necessarily mean adversely anything about the film's quality. I think Indian filmmakers should not feel ashamed that they are making an inferior kind of cinema which cannot stand before the other big works. And I don't think it is correct to think so.
ബാലുവേട്ടന് അമ്മയെ കണ്ട ഓർമ്മയുണ്ടോ?
പിന്നെ അമ്മ മരിക്കുമ്പോൾ എനിക്കൊരു 10 വയസ്സെങ്കിലും കാണും. എന്താ അജയൻ ചോദിച്ചത്?
അവർ നല്ല സ്നേഹമുള്ളവരായിരുന്നു എന്ന് എല്ലാവരും പറയുന്നു.
In this complex work, Adur Gopalakrishnan experiments with the concept of subjective storytelling. The protagonist in Anantaram narrates 2 stories about himself in the first person.
എന്നെ പ്രസവിച്ച സ്ത്രീ ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, എന്നെങ്കിലും കണ്ടുമുട്ടിയാൽ ഞാൻ അവരെ ഞെരിച്ചു കൊല്ലും.
The history of cinema has been so dominated by simplistic narratives that it has almost become impossible to have a serious engagement between the viewer and the screen. And unfortunately, the group of critics and cineasts who have eulogized these personal, contemplative filmmakers have labeled all those films as classics. And that can be dangerous. As Mark Twain once said, the problem with classics is that everyone likes to know about them, but nobody wants to read them. So friends, all I can say is that it is very, very important to drop labeling of all these films, but watch these films for the sheer enjoyment of the magic on the screen. So with these words, I bid you goodbye until the next edition of Frame to Frame.